So I was trying to think about what I wanted to talk about today in a video, and I knew I wanted it to be related to confidence. And I've been reading Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. And so I've been learning about being vulnerable, which is something that, believe it or not, I'm learning how to do, that I'm not that great at. And she talks about shame. And so I was thinking about that word shame, and I was thinking about a lot of the clients that I've worked with, and even friends who I've seen go through really tough times and literally pull themselves out of the pit of despair. And what I have seen is that when people really start to work on loving themselves and identifying their shame triggers, but not just identifying, but healing that narrative in their head about not being good enough or being bad or failing, when they've started to heal and change that narrative, they've started to take away and heal that shame, which has actually made them stronger, more resilient, and made it possible for them to move forward. So, in Brene Brown's book, she talks about how the antidote to shame is empathy. And she talks about how sharing our stories can elicit empathy. It also can create a space for other people to feel comfortable being vulnerable and also sharing their stories. And so I wanted to give a really great example about an experience I had as a new mom a million moons ago. I say that it was 11 years ago. And it was my oldest son. So I had one kid at the time, and he was 4 or 5 months old. And I had just started back at a 40 plus hour a week job in child protective services. And had worked a late on call shift and got home at like 6:30, and I was decided to go in late to work. And I had told my husband I was going to stay home with my son in the morning, and that our relative who was watching him could come a little later. And I had my son on the bed with some pillows around him, and I walked from the bed over to grab a cup of coffee and take a sip, and I heard my son roll for the first time off the bed and onto the floor, half on a pillow, half on the hardwood floor. And my son is crying, and I'm, pick him up, and I'm hysterical. And the thoughts that are going through my head is I'm an awful mother, I'm horrible, like my husband's going to be so angry with me, like my child's not going to be okay. Like I could see he had already calmed down. I could see that physically he was pretty much okay, but I was also just like, what if he's not? I've scarred my child for life, and every horrible thought, like I'm just the worst mom ever. And so I called my husband, who was frantic and was, this is his first experience with the baby rolling off the bed. And, he was pretty upset and shook by it. And he comes home. And by the time he comes home, he's very calm. And he's telling me, it's okay. And I'm like, why are you so calm? And he's like, you're not a horrible mom. Like, I was telling some of my coworkers on the way out the door, and they were like, oh, don't worry. My daughter fell off the couch, and my child fell out of a stroller. And I was like, they're just saying that. They're just saying that. So I call my supervisor, and I'm humiliated, but I just have to tell her what's going on. Hey, I'm going to be even later into work. I'm taking my son to the doctor. Like, he rolled off the bed. I want to make sure he's okay. And I'm hysterical. And she says, Stephanie, calm down. My son fell out of a shopping cart one time at Walmart. And I'm like, she says when he was 6 months old or something. And I'm like, well, he was older and it probably wasn't that bad. And I'm just thinking in my head, like, this pediatrician's gonna think I'm awful. I'm like the worst social worker ever, on top of being a mom. And so I make an appointment. We go in, and my child's fine at this point, doesn't even have a bruise, but in my head there's something probably horribly wrong with him. And so we go in, and I just remember thinking, oh, I think these nurses are like thinking horrible things about me. And the pediatrician walks in, and I am hysterical. And he just, like, I still get emotional about it. He, like, puts his hand on my shoulder, because I'm thinking, I was like, I just turned around for a second. I should have known better. And he tells me, he's looking at my son. He's like, he looks great. He's going to be okay. And he was like, kids are really resilient. You're not a horrible mom. And he was like, I remember when my 6-month-old daughter rolled off of the changing table while I was changing her onto our tile floor. And he said, I was hysterical, thought that, she was she was gonna not be okay. He was like, I felt the same way, even knowing that she was okay as a pediatrician. He's like, and she's now 14 and an honor student and, none the wiser. Like, she's doing great. And in that moment, that whole narrative of I'm a horrible piece of shit mom went out the window, because the pediatrician, I had, for some reason he had more authority than everyone else, but the pediatrician offered his story to me, to a hysterical mom in that moment, and saw me and let me know that it's okay. Kids are resilient. And thankfully my child was okay. And shared something so real and raw with me. And because of that, I was able to let go of, I am not a horrible mom. I'm a great mom. I made a mistake. And so in a very similar way, I think that one way to be more confident, one way to have more love for yourself and more compassion is to share your stories, and is to show yourself that compassion, the compassion that somebody else had to show me in order for me to believe that I am not a horrible mom, that I am not a piece of crap. When someone showed that empathy to me and that compassion, I was able to love myself again and know that I was going to be okay. And so if we can do that with ourselves, number one, and, getting rid of perfectionism and understanding that we're going to make mistakes, and that we are not perfect and we're not supposed to know how to do something the first time. And even if we know how to do something, that we may make mistakes. The more that we can tell ourselves that I'm capable of learning and growing, I do not have to be perfect because it's impossible, but I can keep trying. And the more that we share with other people or seek to understand other people and, listen for those stories with people with similar experiences, the more compassion and grace we'll have for ourselves, but then ultimately for other people. So I wanted to talk about that today, and really working on becoming more shame resilient through changing what you're saying about yourself. Try talking to people that you trust about these, experiences that you've had where you've been really hard on yourself, and start listening to how people talk about you. Would your best friend, would your trusted partner, would your parents, if they're a loving, encouraging parent, would they say the things that you're thinking about yourself? Or would they say, you just made a mistake, you're being too hard on yourself? And start changing that narrative. But the one other thing that Brene Brown says is that when we keep it to ourselves, shame in silence and secrecy, it breeds shame. And so bringing some of those things into the light, whether it's with a therapist or a trauma group or a trusted friend or family member or coworker, that can help you to start healing those shame triggers and to start showing yourself compassion and showing yourself love, which can help you to become more confident.